there are two types of solids. Those that have a regular arrangement of particles, called crystalline solids, versus those with no long-range pattern or order, called amorphous solids. In this video, we're going to discuss crystalline solids, their general structure, and several types. The 3D pattern of a crystalline solid is called a crystal lattice. The smallest repeating unit of the pattern is called a unit cell. So imagine a large grid of cubes. The entire grid is the crystal lattice. Each cube is called a unit cell, one unit of the entire lattice. There are lots of types of unit cells. When studying a variety of chemicals, the repeating unit isn't always just a simple cube. Let's look briefly at just the first three: simple cubic, body-centered cubic, and face-centered cubic. In a simple cubic unit cell, there is a particle at each corner of the cube. This unit cell with a particle at each corner is the repeating unit in 3 dimensions. This drawing of the unit cell can be deceiving. Right now, the particles look like tiny spheres connected by bars. It's not like that at all. Imagine instead 8 spheres stacked up as a cube. Each sphere touches the spheres in the adjacent corners. Understand that unit cells are a way of packing particles close together, but it's not particles linked by bonds necessarily. How many total atoms are inside a simple cubic unit cell? Only 1/8 of each atom is actually on the inside of the cube. So 1/8 of 8 atoms equals 1 atom per unit cell. A body-centered cubic unit cell still has the particles in each corner, but it also has one particle mashed into the center of the cube. Again, this unit cell repeats in 3D. What does this look like in a space-filling representation? Notice that the corner particles don't touch each other this time. Each corner particle touches the particle in the center. In this setup, then, how many atoms per unit cell? As before, 1/8 of the 8 corner atoms plus the entire center atom equals 2 atoms per unit cell in a body-centered cubic setup. A face-centered cubic unit cell has the corner particles plus a particle in every face of the cube. How many atoms per unit cell here? Again, 1/8 of the 8 corner atoms plus half of each face atom. And there's 6 faces, so half of 6 is 3. 3 plus 1 from all the corners is 4 atoms per unit cell. Here's another set of drawings of all 3 unit cells: a skeleton drawing, a space-filling model, and then a drawing of one unit cell within a larger crystal lattice. And remember, there's loads more types of unit cells out there. We just looked at 3 of the simpler ones. So let's move on and talk about different types of crystalline solids. There's 6 types that we'll talk about based on what type of particle exists at the lattice points in the lattice. Ionic solids, molecular solids, which can be nonpolar or polar, and 3 types of atomic solids: metallic, non-bonding atomic, and network covalent solids. Make sure you see the difference between this and our previous discussion of unit cells. Unit cells tell us about physical structure. How are the particles stacked together? Types of crystalline solids tells us about the chemical composition. What's the identity of the particles in the unit cell? Ionic solids have ions at the points in the lattice. What force holds ions together? It's the Coulombic attraction between oppositely charged particles. In this case, we call that ionic bonding. Because ionic bonding is a strong force, ionic solids usually have high melting points and boiling points. That means that most ionic compounds are solids at room temperature. Because the ions are locked in place, ionic compounds are brittle. If you hammer a large piece of rock salt, it breaks. In an ionic solid, all the electrons are associated with a particular ion. No electrons are free to just float around. As a result, in solid form, ionic compounds are poor conductors. In a molecular solid, molecules occupy the points in the lattice. Consider the example of dry ice, solid carbon dioxide. A common misunderstanding here is to think of a carbon atom in one spot, an oxygen atom in an adjacent spot, another oxygen on the other side. That's not how it is. Instead, picture an entire CO2 molecule sitting in each point. Molecular solids have an entire molecule sitting in each lattice point. In the case of dry ice, those carbon dioxide molecules are held together by weak dispersion forces. But different types of molecules have different intermolecular forces. When talking about nonpolar molecular solids, like the dry ice example, the only forces between the molecules are London dispersion forces. And we know from a previous video, the strength of dispersion forces depends on polarizability, which depends on the number of electrons in the molecule. Nonpolar molecular solids, having only dispersion forces between particles, usually have very low melting points and boiling points. Therefore, most nonpolar molecular compounds are not solids at room temperature. Most are gases. When the lattice is composed of polar molecules, what types of IMFs could be present, depending on the exact identity of the polar molecular compound? All molecular compounds exhibit dispersion forces between molecules. Polar molecules also feel dipole-dipole interactions. And some polar molecules meet the criteria necessary to exhibit hydrogen bonding between molecules. Remember that dipole forces are generally stronger than dispersion forces, and hydrogen bonding is definitely stronger than dipole forces. But no matter how strong the IMFs, they're always much weaker than the covalent bonds that are inside the individual molecules. Under the heading of atomic solids, we have metallic, non-bonding atomic, and network covalent solids. Recall from Chem 1, the internal structure of a metal is referred to as the electron sea model, an array of metal cations in a sea of mobile valence electrons. So in a metallic solid, it's metal ions at the points of the lattice. The electron sea model effectively accounts for the known properties of metals. Because the attraction between the metal cations and the mobile electrons is very strong, metals have high melting and boiling points. Metals are malleable and ductile because the sea of electrons acts like soft padding. Metal ions can slide by one another when the sample is struck or stretched. Also, because the electrons are mobile, metals are good conductors of both heat and electricity. If an element is not a metal, it cannot be a metallic solid. Some nonmetal elements form what are called non-bonding atomic solids. These have individual atoms at the points of the lattice. In truth, the only examples of non-bonding atomic solids are the noble gases in their solid form. What is the only force of attraction that can exist between atoms? London dispersion forces, because atoms are naturally nonpolar particles. As another reminder, the strength of dispersion forces depends on polarizability, which depends on the number of electrons in the atom. Non-bonding atomic solids have low melting points, but know that their melting points increase with increasing polarizability. Like non-bonding atomic solids, network covalent solids also have atoms at the lattice points. But there's a significant difference with major implications between these two types of solids. In a non-bonding atomic solid, the atoms are attracted to one another by weak dispersion forces. A network covalent solid, like carbon in the form of diamond, is composed of atoms all bound to the next atom by a true covalent bond. The difference between dispersion forces and covalent bonds is huge. While non-bonding atomic solids tend to have low melting and boiling points, network covalent solids have very high melting points, almost 4,000 degrees Celsius for diamond. There are very few examples of network covalent solids. Several allotropes of carbon, elemental silicon, silicates, compounds of silicon and oxygen like silicon dioxide, as well as the compound silicon carbide. I'll discuss network solids in more detail in a later video. For now, it's time to review. What are the 6 types of crystalline solids you just learned about? Ionic, nonpolar and polar molecular, metallic, non-bonding atomic, and network covalent. Those last 3 are all considered types of atomic solids. Just to go ahead and address some common mistakes. What elements can form metallic solids? Yeah, that would be the metals. Not surprisingly, Non-metallic elements cannot form metallic solids. What types of crystals form from these elements in yellow? Hopefully you recognize that these are our 7 diatomic elements. That means they don't exist as discrete atoms, they exist as molecules, so they would be molecular solids. Nonpolar molecular, to be more exact. What about the elements in blue here? What type of crystal do these form? The noble gases form non-bonding atomic solids. These elements, highlighted in red, as well as oxygen, occur in different forms in nature. Different forms of an element are called allotropes. For example, allotropes of carbon include diamond, graphite, and coal. All 3 are made from only carbon atoms. The only difference between them is their crystal structure. I talk more about allotropes of carbon in the next video. I point out the allotropic elements here only to let you know that these elements exist in several different forms, which may be classified differently in terms of crystal types. One more thing, please note, allotropic is not a type of solid. That's why I put the word in parentheses. Well, that's a lot of information. Let's summarize. Pause the video and see if you can list from memory all 6 types of crystals, the particle at the lattice points in each type, and the type of attraction between those particles. What are the 3 types of atomic solids discussed? Metallic, non-bonding atomic, and network covalent. What particles make up a metallic lattice? Metal cations. And the type of attraction in a metallic solid is called metallic bonding. What particles make up a non-bonding atomic solid? Individual atoms. What force of attraction exists between those atoms? Dispersion forces only. Network covalent solids also have individual atoms at each lattice point, but a much stronger force of attraction holds these atoms together in network solids. Covalent bonding. Virtually all compounds form one of 3 types of crystals. What are they? Ionic, nonpolar, or polar molecular. What particles make up an ionic solid? Ions. What's the force of attraction between ions? Ionic bonding, the Coulombic attraction between oppositely charged particles. In a nonpolar molecular solid, what particles exist at the lattice points? Entire molecules, nonpolar molecules. And how are these nonpolar molecules attracted to one another? Via dispersion forces. Finally, what particles occupy the lattice points in a polar molecular solid? Polar molecules. What types of attractions exist between polar molecules? Definitely dispersion and dipole forces. Possibly hydrogen bonding as well. That's the core material about solids and types of crystals. I will discuss atomic solids in more detail in the next video. Make sure and watch that one too.